We have second aorist participles that are also forms we're going to see in the Greek language. Second aorists, remember, differ from first aorists in the indicative mood. How do they do that? First aorists use what tense formative? Sigma alpha. And they also have in the indicative an augment, right? So it's going to be stem, sa. The second aorist is going to also have the augment and the tense stem, but no sa, right? What does it have for a tense formative in the second aorist? It has no tense formative, 0. Instead, I get, so I'm going to put a blank here for nothing, and then I get omicron or epsilon, which is connecting vowel, right? So this is the difference between first and second aorist in the active and the middle. And we're going to see something very similar here then when we come to second aorist participles that are active and middle. So how do we form these? Well, we're going to use the aorist active stem, just as we do for the aorist indicative. But remember, since we're outside of the indicative mood, it will be unaugmented. So no augments here. Tense formatives are nil. Okay. The participle morpheme, though, is still the new tau if we're active, meno-mene if we're middle. Why am I not using the word passive here? Because the aorist passives are different from aorist middles. Okay, so we're going to deal with the passive ones here all by themselves in just a minute. And then the case endings are standard in that they follow, if they're active, the 3-1-3 declension pattern. Middles follow the 2-1-2, right? Because new tau is a that's a consonantal ending. Then I'm adding my case endings after this. Meno-mene, omicron is second declension. Alphas and etas for stem endings are first declension. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at the forms here. We're going to use the word ballo, okay? So in the present active indicative, for to cast, it's ballo with a double lambda. The present stem has 2 lambdas here. We learned the second aorist was ebalon. He threw. Ebalon. Look at the form here. Outside of my augment, connecting vowel and personal ending, my tense stem is beta, alpha, lambda with a single lambda. Okay, so that's the aorist-stem. For my second aorist active participle, then I'm going to use the stem with no augmenting. And then since there's no tense formative, I go straight to my connecting vowel, new tau participle, and case endings. And so if you look very carefully at all these endings here, they look just like another participle that you've already learned. What do they look like? The present active participle. Think luo becomes luon, luontas, luonti, luonta, right? So the second aorist active participle is going to look just like the present active participle, the only difference being which stem I'm using. Okay, what would the present active participle of ballo look like? It would be ballon, ballontas, okay, and so forth. Look just like this except for the double lambdas here. Okay, so that's what you're going to be looking for to know the difference between the two. So I haven't given you the plural forms, just the singular ones, but let's read the singular forms for masculine, feminine, neuter. Ready? Ballon, ballontas, ballonti, ballonta. And then for the feminines, we go from third declension to 1 declension, or first declension, right? Balusa, baluses, baluse, balusan. And then neuter, we're back to third declension. Ballon should have been ballant with no ending, and the final tau drops out, right? So that explains that form there. Ballantis, ballanti, and ballon. Remember, the neuter forms have identical nominative and accusative. Okay, and if I asked you to write down all the plural forms, I'm sure you could do it, couldn't you? Yes, absolutely. All right, now we also have second aorist-stemmed middle participles. These are going to use the second aorist stem, like genomai becomes gen. So let's just jot that down. Genomais are lexical form. The second aorist middle is egenamein. All right, That should be an eta there. Genomein. So look at what we have here. The second aorist middle indicative has its augment, gen, connecting vowel, personal ending. We're just going to grab that gen and use it over here for the second aorist participle, but no augments since we're dealing with participles. Use our connecting vowel, omicron before moos and news, and then the meno mene ending. So this is pretty simple, easy. How are we going to compare this with the present middle participle for genomai? It would be genomenos, and so forth. So see how they're almost the same. It's just the present stem versus the aorist-stem, gen versus gen. All right, so let's read the forms together. Again, I just have given you the singular forms here. I've omitted the plural. Masculine, everybody. Genomenos, genomenu, genomeno, and then genomenon. Feminine forms, genomene, genomenes, genomene, and genomenin. And then the neuter forms, genomenon, genomenu, genomeno, and genomenon. Now let's look at the second aorist passive formations. We have to do these differently because the first aorist passive and the second aorist passive are really completely unrelated to the first aorist active middle and second aorist active middle. Okay? The first aorist passive and the second aorist passive are related to each other. But the sigma alphas of the aorist active and middle is not used here. We're not dealing with that at all, okay? What we're dealing with is the theta eta or the theta epsilon for the participle, and then seeing how is it changed to form the second aorist passive participle. All right, so let's take a look at the handout here. How do we form the second aorist passive? We're using the aorist passive stem. Again, that's the sixth column of your principal parts. But remember, because we're outside the indicative mood, it's unaugmented. The tense formative is epsilon instead of theta epsilon. So theta epsilon was used in the first aorist passive participle. And the second aorist passive participle is always going to have a tense formative that's shorter than the first. The participle morpheme is going to use nu tau, which you associate with active participles. This is the aorist passive participle, but remember, the pesky aorist passives are always going to be using active formations. So we just have to get used to that. That's true in the indicative. It's also true in the participle. And then the case endings are going to follow the 3-1-3 pattern. So let's read these forms here. Using grapho, grapho is to do what? To write. Okay. Now, let me just remind us about one real important fact about the aorist. First aorist versus second aorist. What is the first aorist active of grapho? It's egrapsa. So when I'm forming the first aorist of this verb, or the aorist of this verb, the aorist active, does it use a first or a second aorist formation? It's first. Okay, so it's first aorist in the active, and if it's first aorist in the active, it'll also be first aorist in the middle too. Okay. But look here, for the aorist passive form, it's egraphane, not egraphane, egraphane. So that aorist passive is a second aorist passive. Okay? Well, what does that tell us? It reminds us that something could be first aorist in the active, but second aorist in the passive. Okay? Just because it's first aorist in the active doesn't mean its aorist passive will be first aorist passive. Okay, so you just have to learn these one by one. Grapho is a verb that just happens to form its aorist passive using a second aorist passive formation. And that means that when we form the aorist passive participle of grapho, we're going to use a second aorist passive formation for it too, which is to take the stem unaugmented, but instead of adding the theta epsilon, we're just going to add the epsilon. And then it should have been nu tau sigma. What happened to the nu tau before the sigma? Drops out. Epsilon compensatorily lengthens to the diphthong epsilon iota. All right? So let's read the forms here. Graphase, graphentos, graphenti, graphenta, and then on the plural side, graphentes, graphentone, graphesi, and graphentas. Notice the nutal has dropped out before the sigma, and I have that compensatory lengthening again. All right, feminine forms. We're going from third declension to first, then back to third with these forms. Graphesa, grapheses, graphese, and grapheson. And then the plural side, graphesi, grapheson, graphesis, graphesas. And then our neuter forms, everybody, graphen. It should have been graphent with a 0 ending, and the final tal drops out, right? So graphen, graphentas, graphenti, graphen, and plural neuters, graphenta, graphentone, graphesi, and graphenta. All right, so if we were to boil all these second aorist forms to these 6 boxes to memorize, as Mounce gives them to us, it would be on, ontas for the second aorist active, usa, uses, and on, ontas. That's identical to the present participles 6 boxes that you've already learned. So you don't have to memorize anything new here. You've already got these. Same thing with the second aorist middle. Amenas, amenu, amene, amenes, amenon, amenu. Okay? Here's where we're rather different. Instead of thes, it's just ace, missing the theta. Ace, entos, asa, aces, and entos. Okay? So really focus on that one. All right, and I think that's it. All right, so if we go to page 264 in Mounce, I just want to mention that there are a couple of different forms that are forms you've already learned in the indicative moods, and here he gives us the forms in the participial formation. Okay, so take a look at ago as an example. All right, that's the present active indicative. And the present participle would take the present stem and add the appropriate endings. Agant would become agants in the nominative singular, and then we've got some changes here, and we get this omega. So we've seen agon. All right. Now the second aorist is agagon for this one. So I am leading. And I led, agagon. What's going on here? The second aorist has reduplicated the stem, so ag, and then it lengthened the initial alpha in order to create an augment, because you had to do that for the aorist active indicative. So what's the actual stem? How do we get the stem? Well, we unaugment any augments, and we drop off any personal endings and connecting vowels, and we're left with ag, right, or ag, and then we add our participle formations. So take a look at the difference here. Agon would be leading, or while leading if it's present, right, and then agagon is after leading, and it's an aorist. They look the same on the back end. The only thing that can tell you which is the present stem versus the aorist stem here. Okay, so this is what you have to be looking for as you are parsing your forms. We'll take a look at another one. So iro was one of the verbs that you've already learned. So I lift up, take up. Okay, the present active participle is iron, and then the aorist is era. Now, is this a second aorist here? No. What kind of an aorist is this based on the chapters Mounce has given us and descriptions? It's actually a liquid aorist. It's a liquid aorist. So remember, first aorists don't have any transformative, and they use the omicron epsilon connecting vowels. This is a form that is actually really a first aorist, but its stem happens to have a liquid consonant. it's using R, and it lengthened the alpha to create an augment, and then it wanted to add a sigma alpha, but rho is what kind of a consonant? It's a liquid consonant. Remember what liquids do with sigmas? They don't play nice. So when I have a rho, which is a liquid, followed by a sigma alpha, the sigma likes to do what? Likes to drop out. And that's why I just have the alpha here. Okay? So sigma alpha. So basically what we have for the participle then, since a liquid aorist is really a first aorist that just can't use the sigma, what I wanted to do was to see something like this. Air, sauce, right? Remember, sauce is my first form in my boxes of the aorist active participle. It would have been, it would have been R sauce on augment the eta, add the sigma alpha. It would have been nu tau sigma, and the nu tau falls out. Okay, but liquid consonants cannot abide the sigma, so that's going to fall out. So my form will end up looking like this. So iron is while taking up, while taking up or lifting. Aras would be after taking up, after lifting up. Okay, so there's our distinctions there. So he gives you several examples that you will want to take a look at and study. If you have questions about any of those, I'm happy to answer questions about those. But as you come to the participles, they're going to be unaugmented, which means they're going to look slightly different than what you've been seeing in these chapters that are using the aorists in their indicative forms. You have to make that transition in your mind. Unaugment, but look at the stem that you have left once you unaugment and see, is this a present stem? Is it an aorist-stem? Is there a sigma alpha? Is there not? Is there a theta epsilon? Or is there not? Okay, and if it's looks like it should have had a sigma alpha, but it only has the alpha, then ask yourself, why is that sigma gone? Is there a liquid consonant right before that alpha that caused the sigma to go away? What are my 4 liquid consonants according to Mounce? Lambda, rho, mu, nu. Okay, so those are liquids. All right, we'll stop with that.